So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion on regulating AI in the EU's illiberal democracies, lessons from Hungary and Poland. My name is Julia Trehu. I'm a program manager and fellow with the German Marshall Fund's Digital Innovation and Democracy Initiative. And our topic today is AI governance, which is at the top of the agenda in the EU. And the last year has been especially busy with the launch of ChatGPT, coinciding with the final stretch of negotiations on the long-awaited AI Act. So in today's discussion, we're going to focus on some national level case studies. What are the potential social and political consequences of AI policy in these countries? And what broader lessons can we draw in the context of the EU evolving regulatory environment? So to answer these questions, I'm joined by three panelists. Filip Konopczyński is a lawyer and analyst focusing on AI and emerging tech regulation, and he's a fellow with GMF's ReThink.CEE program, which supports policy analysts and civic activists from Central and Eastern Europe. And he's presenting his new paper on Hungary and Poland's AI policies, which I encourage you all to read, and I will share in the chat. Ewelina Jelenkowska-Luca is head of communication with the Directorate General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology, DG Connect, at the European Commission. And Éva Simon is a senior advocacy officer and a tech and rights lead at the Civil Liberties Union for Europe. So Ewelina is going to kick us off with a presentation on the AI Act and give us an overview of the current state of play. Then we'll move to Filip, who will present his paper, and then to Éva for her thoughts and reactions and a quick presentation. And then we'll move to an open discussion among the panelists. So we plan to go until 4:30 p.m. and I will set aside the last 20 minutes or so for audience questions. So please submit your questions in the chat and we will turn to them at the end. So with that, over to Ewelina to talk about the AI Act.
Thank you very much. I'll try to share my screen. Please let me know if you see it. I'll put it in presentation mode. I will try to be very brief in presenting you. Sorry, I didn't put it in the presentation mode. There it is. So it's of course a huge topic. So 8 minutes is quite a challenge, but I'll try to select some things that could be pertinent for the discussion around the paper later. Let me just start by saying that, of course, first of all, AI is not just one technology. It's not another technology. It's a true revolution. And I think that we can be proud to say that Europe has understood it probably as the first one. When our president proposed in 2019, before she even became the president, that she would like to propose some kind of regulation of AI, most of the people didn't know what she was talking about and why it was even relevant. Only in the last couple of years, especially with ChatGPT and those applications that are usable to all of us, AI has become a topic, and it is without no doubt that it is a revolution that is similar to the one that we have seen as industrial revolution, and the last one probably the internet. It will certainly change our lives, and let's say that the aim of Europe is that it changes the lives of the Europeans for the better. Now, wait, how do I move on? Sorry, I'm not terribly, okay, there you go. It is, it is much more than AI Act. I'm sure that you have heard about AI Act. The policy or European policy is much broader than just the Act. Act is, of course, a very important part of it, and it's a new kid on the block. We have had an agreement. I will show you the timeline in 2 seconds. But it's much more than that. To have a successful policy around AI around such pervasive technology as it is, which will touch most probably virtually all the aspects of our lives, you need much more. So you need not only the regulation for the development and safe AI, which AI Act is, but you need also a lot of investment, you need a lot of skills, you need an ecosystem that works at EU level. And this is what we are trying to do. I have prepared a little slide for you to show you the key policy objectives, and there are a lot of things hiding behind each of those bullet points, which of course we don't have time to go into. But to make it very simple, first of all, as you see, the set of enabling conditions for AI development. So it's the tools, it's the data, because there is no AI without data, but there is no AI without cyber security, and there is no AI without supercomputing. So all this creates the ecosystem. That's why I'm saying that, you know, AI alone is not enough. Then to make the EU the right place, so we are pointing at excellence, at helping researchers, but also helping small and medium enterprises, providing for example, sandboxes, which is indeed in the AI Act, and fostering funding. And of course, the public funding and European funding is not enough. Usually, money is never enough, but it's to foster a coherent approach at EU level so that even the national investments can be leveraged, and that we create a sort of Silicon Valley of AI. I know it might sound ambitious, but we have moved ahead, not unlike we did in the internet area. This time we were really front runners, and I think that Europe has all the right cards to become the best place to live in the digital area. And this is and this is our ambition. Then ensure that technology works for people. So the talent, as I mentioned, but also the safety and trustworthy AI. This is what we like to call human-centric AI. And then last but not least, of course, building strategic leadership in the different sectors, because of course we not only have the horizontal approach, but also the sectorial approach. Now, let me say a few words about the AI Act, because the Filip's paper is very much focusing also on the AI Act and how the legislation was proposed and how it was negotiated, and the key points. Indeed, again, a very broad issue, but to make it very short, what was the revolutionary approach of this act? I can tell you that when President von der Leyen proposed this, there was a lot of fear that we are going to freeze innovation. So of course, the solution we needed to find was to, on one hand, make sure that AI will be future-proof, the AI Act, not to freeze the innovation, but on the other hand, that it would make sure that any developments would respect fundamental rights and European values. And I believe that this is what we were able to find by how, well, not regulating the technology as such, but regulating the uses. So any new technology that can be developed any day. I mean, when we proposed the act back in 2021, ChatGPT was not a thing. And still, this act is still valid for ChatGPT and the like, and the LLM models, precisely because it doesn't regulate the technology as such, but regulates its uses. And how does it do it? The AI Act, you might be surprised, but will cover something like maybe 10% of all AI developments. So those that are judged as risky. So either very risky or minimum risk, and only those are concerned. And most of the AI that you are familiar with today will not fall under the AI Act. It's not necessary. So this act makes sure that the AI is safe in those areas that are risky. So you can see here some examples. What was also another important thing was that we as Europe are making a valorial choice, to stick to our values and to declare certain uses of AI, which will be legal and that are already used, and we know it in other parts of the world, unacceptable in Europe. You here have the example of social scoring or untargeted scraping, and these will be prohibited risks. So if there is any of it going on in the member states now, once the act is published, and I will also show you the timeline, they have 6 months to phase them off. Now, there are also high risks. Here, they are defined, well defined, but in a flexible way. Again, more around the use. So certainly the medical, but also transport. So anything basically that concerns fundamental rights and safety, life and health. Now, this is how the political agreement of AI Act was reached. I will not stop too much. This is quite self-explanatory, I suppose. We were happy to reach the political agreement. Now what needs to be done? So we are the first continent in the world to have a legislative act. It's true that US has got executive order, but this is not a legislative act. It's an execution. The execution power act, so not a legislative act, which makes a bit difference. Now, whom do the rules apply to? They apply to basically everyone. So in this area of the risky AI uses, which is the only scope of the act, it will apply to absolutely everyone. So public and private actors, the producers, and the users. It will apply also equally to 27 member states because it's a regulation. So it doesn't need to be transposed, but it needs still to be politically well agreed by the two institutions. Here is the timeline of the entrance into force. So once we will have the vote, we expect, we hope that we will have the act published around April or March next year. This is from that date, from the date of entry into force, which will enter into force 20 days after the publication. You will have all those, let's say, staggered application. The first one I already mentioned is the 6 months when the member states will have 6 months to phase out all the prohibited systems, and then gradually 1 year to have to apply the rules to the general purpose AI, which was a big discussion, by the way. Then 2 years for all the other rules and the high risk rules that are specified in Annex 3. And then, so the sectors, and then the high risk rules, there will be up to 3 years to apply the other ones. Since this is a long timeline, we realize that the Commission is also encouraging the industry to, through an AI pact, to anticipate the preparations and already start applying the rules which will come at a certain date, but to start applying them on voluntary basis. Now, how will we enforce AI Act? There will be multiple overlapping and mutually supportive structures, as you will see. So of course, it's an act that will be enforced both at European level and at national levels. So there must be this interplay between the national competent authorities and the European level. By the way, for your information, the AI office, which has been foreseen in the AI Act, will be set up in my own DG, so in DG Connect. We are already gearing up for preparation. The last week we have adopted communication with the decision which will enter into force on the 21st of February, from which we will start organizing internally. And then we will have a network of national competent authorities, which will sit at the European level in the Artificial Intelligence Board. And then we will have advisory forum, which is selection of stakeholders, SMEs, to keep having feedback on how the implementation is going and be able to maybe adjust. And then we will also, of course, have a whole group of scientists in a more structured way to advise us during the whole way. I think that I have exhausted my 8 minutes. Maybe I even went beyond that. But then if you have questions, I'm at your service.
You're right on time. Perfect timing. Thank you, Ewelina. I think this is a really important context for what's happening at the EU level before we go into the national cases. So now I'm going to ask Filip to share his presentation and talk to us about his paper, which you can find a link to in the chat. So Filip, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia, and to you, Ewelina, for your introduction. That's right. Part of the focus of my paper was the AI Act, particularly the AI Act negotiations, which I have experienced, well, somewhat firsthand, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And I think there are many lessons we should learn from not only the contents of the act, but also the process that made it happen. So yeah, that presentation is based on my paper that has just been published. Its focus is our AI policies in Poland and Hungary, and I look at them through the lenses of illiberal democracy or backsliding democracy, which is a combination of political agendas and basically new emerging political regimes that shares certain characteristics with both liberal democracy and authoritarianism. I focused on economic and institutional background, government's approach to EU regulations and policies, use and implementation of AI in the public sector, legal and societal risks, implications for democracy and fundamental rights, as well as included policy recommendations. I did that by talking to experts both from Poland and Hungary, doing a desk research, and as I already mentioned, focusing on the AI Act negotiations, which led me to some insights that I'm going to share with you right now. So I want to start with the grand view of the policy field here. Up until quite recently, AI policies really wasn't a thing. It was more of a name for type of R&D agenda performed either by the university or, as was the case in the States, by a conglomerate of public and private actors, often under the umbrella of the state, or to be more precise, the defense sector. But right now, with the rise of AI and the unprecedented rate of digital innovations, we can divide the whole field of AI policy into three pillars. So there's R&D agenda and funding. We've got regulations, laws, and market oversight. And we have AI implementation in the public sector, for instance, in public services. And what I want to highlight here is, this is my interpretation, but when I read Mariana Mazzucato's paper on governing mission in the European Union, which is closely related to her book, The Mission Economy, inspired by the NASA program and the US approach to innovations, well, I think it has some serious consequences, and we need to get it right if we want to successfully follow or adapt this model. But in a nutshell, apart from focusing on serious issues that technology should help us solve, on a technical and political side, it also translates to more state and, in the case of Europe, EU, oversight over the AI ecosystem, both private and public, which is crucial here. And of course, more state oversight means different things in different places. And in the case of Poland and Hungary, we have a combination of both the return of the state into the field of political economy related to digital issues, as well as serious threats to democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. And so let's take a look at how AI policies have been implemented over the last 5 years in Poland. During that period, the PIS-led government did not really pay too much attention to AI, although in 2020 an official national strategy was published. Initially, that was what I wanted to focus on in the paper, but it turned out that it's hard to write a whole paper on something that's not really being implemented. Implementation of the strategy was not a priority. Even worse, the actual oversight over the emerging AI market was divided between at least 3 different ministries. And over the time, several of the ministers were being replaced. There was political turmoil, and all of that was happening without the change in power. And it led to a situation where the entity responsible for agenda setting, the Ministry of Digital Affairs, was not in charge of either designing or providing grants to innovators. Simultaneously, we couldn't say that Poland didn't digitalize its own administration, because the rise of accessible via web public services was high. And right now, dozens of millions of people in Poland are using e-administration. Now, when it comes to the policy-making process, in Poland, it was characterized by relative or total lack of transparency in public consultations. There were some exceptions. In terms of, for instance, the approach to the AI Act, it was very hard to get any actual and official information from the government, even from the Ministry of Digital Affairs, not to mention the Ministry of Internal Affairs, for instance. And the Ministry of Digital Affairs tried to reach out to the AI community by setting up the working group GRAI. But as I write in the paper, there were at least 3 attempts to reactivate the group, which basically means that it didn't start working at full capacity at any point. And what's also interesting is the fact that despite the high, sometimes somewhat nationalistic rhetorics, the biggest player apart from the state is the big tech, mainly the US companies, both producing hardware and software, and they played an important role on the investment side as well as the policy side. And another thing that should be observed is the fact that funding for R&D project was somewhat delegated from the traditional scientist-led type of regime to a more state-controlled one with several agencies spending money. What has to be highlighted is the fact that the funding policies was fragmented, and there was no oversight and systemic evaluation. Okay. When it comes to Hungary, Hungary also published this AI strategy. It was a little bit different because it focused mainly on the business side. And it can be said that it was implemented to a higher degree than in Poland, and it brought some successes. When it comes to the reach out, to the community reach out or involvement of experts, the AI coalition was established with over 300 or 400 companies and close to 1,000 experts participating. From my interviews, it turned out that the voice of the civic society was not included, and no real engagement with societal stakeholders was practiced within that body. Also, as in the case of Poland, new or reshaped state-controlled agencies responsible for AI and R&D in AI were better funded, which coincided with stagnation in the traditional tertiary education system. Another important thing to mention is the fact that China not only continues to collaborate in strategic projects with Chinese entities, but actually doubles down on that direction, opening new research centers and courting more funds. Just as in Poland, there was no major national level AI legislation. Everybody seemed to be waiting for the EU to act. But there were some first precedent cases related to litigation. For instance, R&D was banned in the case of town of Siofok. Okay, let's do some summary. Both countries approach AI policies in a way that allows us to comment on certain similarities. So we have to put all the ambitious plans presented by Poland and Hungary into proper perspectives. The levels of R&D spendings are low, way below OECD or EU average. The increase rate in AI investment is too slow when compared to other regional or global leaders. And the general level of investment in the whole economy is also low. Another important and similar characteristic is the fact that in both countries, the traditional, normal, regular tertiary education system is underfunded, which leads to brain drain, both with talent escaping both to private sector and state-controlled agencies in order to support their research plans. The control over R&D funding is performed by the state in both cases, which leads to proneness to corruption, fraud, and nepotism. Again, there is no cohesive, systemic, effective evaluation of AI-related policies or programs. Most of them are executed ad hoc. Again, the official illiberal, we can say, narrative focused on digital sovereignty is in stark contrast with the prominent role of foreign, US in the case of Poland and Hungary, and Chinese in the case of Hungary, companies. Again, there are serious threats to be pointed out related to rights, to fundamental rights and rule of law violations, particularly with serious consequences for political opposition, activists, CSOs, or migrants and other non-EU citizens. Another interesting factor, which I think should be taken into consideration when thinking about the general field of AI policies, is the increasing use of AI algorithms in political campaigns, mainly via online platforms. And both countries had only moderate involvement in the EU legislation. We know that both countries unofficially supported the General Council's approach related to exemptions and exceptions for law enforcement agencies, intelligence services in the area of national security, as well as addressing the needs of the industry. But there are also differences. So whereas in Hungary, the control over the AI ecosystem is quite firm, and due to the type of regime that Viktor Orban has managed to build, as well as the actual configuration of the government, it's been rather stable, which brought some positive results. Whereas in Poland, both the funding, agenda setting is fragmented. There was not a singular leading political actor or administrative actor that would be at the helm of AI policies in Poland, and also it led to serious results for the potential of the whole market. Another difference is the fact that after Russia's invasion on Ukraine, Poland gradually but firmly started backtracking from its involvement with Chinese companies. I remember Huawei being one of the strategic partners of the leading R&D grant institution in Poland. And that has changed probably and most likely after the pressure from the US and NATO. Also, the level of state capture of the EU funds is different. There are reports about political corruption related to EU money, but they're in Poland, they're quite recent, but they're not to the extent that has been flagged and investigated by the EU when it comes to Budapest. Another major factor, perhaps that's something we should discuss later on, is the fact that Poland managed to, after the 2023 parliamentary elections, Poland managed to replace its government with the former opposition, EPP-led coalition with Platforma Obywatelska, Lewica, and Polska 2020. And it actually has some political consequences. The Ministry of Digital Affairs is led by the Vice Prime Minister from Lewica, which also coincides with the fact that the same party, the left-wing party, controls the Ministry of Science, and there have been already certain talks about reconfiguration of for instance, control and funding for leading AI agencies. And just yesterday, there was a conference with Minister Gawkowski presenting a new body of experts supporting AI policies in Poland and particularly implementation. And what that leads us to consequences, and I want to state very clearly that those consequences, I think, matter not only for Poles and Hungarians, but also for other EU members, citizens of other EU countries as well. So we have to, despite the political framing of the illiberalism debate, we have to say that there is no spike in official data on state surveillance of citizens. So there isn't mass authoritarian police methods being used, although we have a very, very important case of Pegasus spy malware being installed by both Fidesz and PIS governments on the phones of their political opposition, activists, or even judges. So this is a perfect showcase of what can we expect if we let certain things unchecked. Also, with the push, the EU and basically global push for more monitoring over web content, just like some legislation that's being discussed as we speak, all governments, including the illiberal ones, will have more legal and technical tools for surveilling their citizens. And there have been cases of personal data, for instance, from the public registry being used to fight with the opposition. Minister of Health had to resign after such a scandal in Poland right before the elections. So it has already started. And of course, the groups that are gonna be at the most risk are activists, minorities, migrants, and non-EU citizens, which matters in the term, both in the context of the previous refugee crisis, as well as current situation at the eastern borders of the EU. And another important thing I want to focus on is...
Filip, I'd like to move to Éva's presentation. Maybe we can quickly go through this slide, and then on the recommendations.
Okay, so I'm just going to be very brief.
Discussion.
We have also consequences for democracy when it comes to elections. It's not deepfakes, it's mainly the outstanding presence of online platform recommendation algorithms. And of course, other actors from other countries can learn from the experiences in Poland. There are implications for global security, with NATO adopting the official decoupling policy from China. Hungary goes in the very different direction. Poland, as I mentioned, this is in a different place. Yeah, another thing that I want to highlight, and maybe that's going to be the last slide for now, is the fact that we cannot. There's been some progress, and the AI Act brought certain provisions that might be very helpful when combating certain abuses, but it's not going to be a silver bullet against illiberal abuse of AI systems. And issues such as exceptions for law enforcement, exceptions from obligations for law enforcement or migration, or the complete removal of national security from the scope of the regulation needs to be addressed either on the EU level, which is perhaps a naive thing to say, or more realistically, on national level. Without that, it's hard to imagine a human-centered AI ecosystem with illiberal actors abusing the rights of citizens. Yes, so maybe I'll stop now, and if there's an opportunity, I will come back to the last slides during our discussions. Of course, I recommend checking out my paper. It's available on the website. I'd be glad to answer your questions either now or after the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Filip. And I think this is a good transition for Éva to talk about the civil society perspective. And again, to everyone watching, please put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat for the panelists, and we'll get to them later.
Good afternoon, everyone. I try to share my screen now. and then we can start immediately. Okay. So thank you for having me today. And I'd like to begin by extending my congratulations to Filip for this exceptional work. His research dives deep into the subject matter, despite facing language constraints and navigating a non-transparent environment that restricts access to information, especially when we take into account Hungary and the Hungarian AI strategy. He didn't really have the opportunity to elaborate on the policy recommendations he worked on, even though I find those very important. So I would like to start then with the findings that I fully endorse. And I think this is from the academia perspective, these important findings can be easily translated into civil society policy requirements. So this is where the civil society can easily translate academia's findings. So what I believe is that increasing the funding for EU AI companies this is something that is very important to achieve the goals that were set by the Commission and the EU legislators when drafting the AI Act, but also focusing on the enforcement of the AI Act, including national and EU level offices. This is in line with the lesson that we learned throughout the GDPR enforcement. So we need proper enforcement. We need well-staffed and well-financed enforcement authorities. And we need proper systems when problems appear, because big tech companies have a deep pocket to pay fines, and it can be part of their business model. Therefore, preparing for proper enforcement is the #1 task for the Commission and for national member states as well. The involvement of civil society organization as the next policy recommendations coming from Filip is also important, and it's crucial to ensure that independent third parties supporting proper oversight. There is also a need for multi-stakeholder consultation and addressing the loopholes that Filip already mentioned regarding the national security issues and also some emotional recognition issues that are problematic in the final act that was reached in a political agreement. Also, more transparency is needed, which is vital for a well-functioning system that respects the rule of law requirements. So I believe that, what basically we can say about the paper, and I strongly agree with that, is that AI strategies in member states mirror the political climate and the values shared by the government. I had the privilege to look at other member states' AI strategies, and this is also a valid statement for better shaped democracies as well. So values supported by government appear in their strategy. And if you look at, for example, the Hungarian example, the strategy does not address crucial societal or political issues, altogether neglecting human rights perspective. And it's only focusing on the interest of industry and economy. So this is something that we should keep in mind, that whatever AI strategies national member states come up with, even the oversight of those national strategies would be crucial. The AI Act has a role in protecting the rule of law and democracy, and it could and should have included proper safeguards. And I think this is a very important missed opportunity on behalf of the EU policymakers, mostly the Council and member states, that they didn't insert proper safeguard into the Act. What I'm talking about is that we were advocating for attaching to fundamental rights impact assessment, rule of law impact assessment as well, which could have been a very important safeguard and a very important opportunity for risk analysis, but we couldn't get through this idea. And I think there are many, many reasons why rule of law impact assessment was pushed back. One of the reasons I believe is the potential responses and consequences that could fall out from a country failing to meet the needed threshold for the rule of law requirement. As Filip points out, the AI Act does not cover defense and national security and makes exceptions for public security and migration control efforts, and are needed to establish parallel national measures aligned with EU fundamental values to address potential abuses in these areas. The national security exemptions, not only for the AI Act, but in general, in the digital field of regulation, including, for example, the European Media Freedom Act, is a problem for the EU level. And we know that France is leading on it concerning other pieces of legislation and during the AI Act negotiations as well, which I find one of the most problematic aspects, especially from the angle of the liberal democracies, as we have seen it with the Pegasus software application and the consequences, for example, in Hungary and in Poland. However, there is the light at the end of the tunnel with the recent development in Poland to set up a parliamentary investigative committee on the deployment of the Pegasus software. The principle of the rule of law is fundamental to the EU. This core value is a precondition, the realization of fundamental rights and other fundamental values as well. And the rule of law, as it forms a triangle with the protection of democracy and fundamental rights, these three criteria reinforce each other, and therefore the link between the development and deployment of AI systems and the rule of law must be established. Not to mention that rule of law requirements are properly elaborated at the EU level, triggering consequences that could be potentially used with regard to the AI Act. And even though it's not within the AI Act at the moment, however, member states, but also the Commission during the enforcement could have the potential opportunity to include some sort of rule of law requirement when deploying and developing AI systems within the EU. So the threats and the problems with the AI Act from the perspective of the liberal democracies is what Filip already mentioned, is the blanket national security exemption, which is, we can say, at least from the civil society perspective, is totally inaccurate. Why national security in some instances can be considered legitimate grounds for restricting fundamental rights, any exceptions from AI Act requirements should have been assessed on a case-by-case basis in line with the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and the jurisprudence of the CJEU, so the court of the EU. Here is the only point where I can slightly disagree with Filip. I was looking for some disagreement points. I couldn't find many, but I just used the opportunity at least to trigger some sort of debate. So he rightly puts that law enforcement agencies are allowed to gather extensive personal data, and the EU lacks the political tools to stop governments from such practices or to provide people affected by them with means of legal redress. However, I believe that besides political tools, we are lucky enough to have the Charter of Fundamental Rights and also a network of fundamental rights legislation. I tend to call it the safety net of laws that allows the application of litigation. So when you look at the US or you look at China or Brazil or many other countries where there is under preparation an AI Act, or there could be potentially infringement of fundamental rights, there is no background rules such as the general data protection regulations or others that could be triggered to initiate and to win cases either against government or against private companies. If you think about the Dutch case, the childcare benefit scandal concerning false allegation of fraud made by the Tax and Custom Administration while attempting to regulate the distribution of childcare benefits, that's a proper example how to use and how we can and should and hopefully will be able to use the safety net of laws. Of course, in the Netherlands, it led to the collective resignation of the government in early 2021, And I'm 100% sure that in authoritarian regimes, it would not necessarily lead to the fail of the governments, at least not by their voluntary resignation. But still, litigation can be an effective tool in case litigators, civil society, and also courts are properly empowered with the knowledge and the system create opportunities for class actions. So I personally very much looking for cases brought to the CGEU about this question. The final text of the AI Act doesn't include the prohibition on utilizing emotion recognition in law enforcement and in migration settings, highlighting the legislation's two-tiered approach to fundamental rights. This approach categorizes migrants and those already marginalized as deserving less protection. Additionally, the exemptions from the complete ban on remote biometric identification create a convenient avenue for illiberal democracies to conduct surveillance on individuals deemed as their enemies, whether these are civil society organizations, migrants, journalists, or you name the others they tend to reflect on. We know that the AI Act is not the end of the digital policymaking, but it's an important step that will be revised. There will be new sectoral acts. There will be AI Act. There will be follow-up pieces of legislation, such as the AI Liability Directive. There will be Code of Conduct, delegated acts, and so many others that should be in line with the rule of law standards. So the EU lawmakers and also the national lawmakers will have new and new opportunities to include more protection for fundamental rights and more protection for the rule of law. And given the current decline of the rule of law in Europe and the two countries Filip choose to research, but now we can count on Slovakia, so there are always new candidates to investigate from this perspective. It would be very important, these concerns that I raised and Filip raised in his paper, how the misuse of AI could potentially harm fundamental rights in these countries. In closing, as highlighted by Filip, the association between AI tools and the instances of algorithm-mediated discrimination is also a pressing concern. The extensive integration of AI within government agencies and state-owned entities introduces significant threats to fundamental rights. The apprehension among citizens living in illiberal democracies is justified given the potential misuse of AI by the state to impede fair access to public administration institutions and courts, engage in voter profiling, propagate propaganda and disinformation, and also survey political opponents or voters. And I must also briefly mention that Filip already mentioned is the connection with other authoritarian countries such as China and Russia in case of Hungary that could have an impact on AI development and the AI deployment in these countries. So hence the imperative lies in the establishment of robust laws, safeguards and oversight mechanism, including fundamental rights impact assessment, supported by well-funded and well-equipped independent AI authorities. These measures should be complemented by accessible court procedures available to all, ensuring a safeguarded and equitable AI landscape for everyone. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Éva. So, are there any first reactions from Filip or Ewelina? Otherwise, I'd like to zoom out a bit from the case study on Poland and Hungary and say, what can the experience in these countries tell us about AI policy in democratic societies more generally? What lessons can we pull from these cases? Filip, you identified some patterns and trends as well as some differences, but what's the broader view? What is the takeaway for democracies more generally?
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen again, just to have it easier answering the question. Well, first of all, I like the idea, and I hope it's not just my Polish bias or Central Eastern European bias. I like to think of our region as somewhat an experiment ground, a testing ground for certain policies. And I think that the problem with defining illiberalism, something in between formal liberal democracy and full-blown authoritarianism, unfortunately, is a sign of the times to come. And there are several issues that should be highlighted. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the, okay. There are several issues that I think are crucial. So first of all, the question of whether the new EU AI regulatory regime being able to handle violations by public institutions. It's one thing to, I'm quite hopeful that the European Commission will have not just the political mandate, but also institutional power to curtail and mitigate certain practices by large developers of AI systems, international ones, multinationals, maybe even if the penalties are too little, as Eva rightly pointed out, then the possibility of having your service suspended, well, that's something else. And even the largest players can tremble in the light of such penalty. So this is one thing. How the EU will handle violations of public actors, and France has been already mentioned, but there are other countries. For instance, we learned last year that Czechia's police has introduced a countrywide remote biometric identification system that used all the available data on citizens, for instance, and it's been suspended as far as I know, and we should expect that to return, but within the limits set up by the AI Act. So this is one thing. The other thing is that politicians and politicians with illiberal or authoritarian tendencies are fast learners, and whenever a successful digital campaign is being launched, and Poland was a battlefield, the last elections were basically a battlefield with all the parties spending dozens of millions of zlotys, mainly on YouTube and Facebook, for sponsored ads. So it was within the parameters of the law. But there was no efficient legal oversight. So the old system of regulating the election did not work because it's not up to date with the contemporary trends and technologies and solutions. So it left us in somewhat of a gray area. And Poland was a battlefield, particularly with the pro-turnout campaigns. And we also learned that Hungary was participating. So we had a formal international foreign interference on behalf of Hungary in Polish elections. But in the end, it led to a super high turnout. So it is something I would consider positive. Also, very polarized campaign and society. So that's more negative. But the society has been more democratized in a way when it comes to the amount of people taking part in the election. So that's another thing. We have to watch out because politicians will learn from the examples of other countries. But also, we should point out that there isn't such a thing as one type of illiberal or authoritarian AI policy, or in general technological policy. The very same regulatory framework led to very different results in Poland and Hungary, with Poland being basically decentralized when it comes to its AI policies, which combined with the very limited amount of funding, didn't bring the Polish Silicon Valley. We also use this concept. Yeah, so that's another thing that I think it's crucial here. And of course, maybe to mention the foreign interference thing. Well, it's basically from the perspective of authoritarian or illiberal governments, no rules over digital campaigning or the use of AI, the use of sensitive personal data, for instance, for training AI models for electoral purposes. A lot of oversight over that is not a good thing for a liberal politician, but it also at the same time allows, gives a free pass for all foreign actors. So it's quite absurd, but the levels of Russian propaganda in Poland is super high, and it seems that no one really cares. I mean, there isn't an agency that monitors and tackles those threats. It's not being discussed on the media. Whenever we see reports, we see very high levels of interference, and there isn't much apart from appealing to large online platforms that even the government can do, not to mention civil society or political opposition. So that's another threat. And of course, we should also mention that the big tech plays a big role, not just in terms of policy. In a way, due to the emergence of those online platforms where most of the elections are being fought these days, the governments are really, I would say, vassals to large corporations, and they have a huge sway, not just in formal in the formal sense, but also in terms of, for instance, shadow banning or taking particular policy decisions. And here's where DSA and political ad regulation can do a lot. And I'm very, very hopeful that it's going to happen. So there are at least 4 things. I hope I answered your question. If not, I'm here to talk about it more if it's necessary.
Yeah, thank you, Filip. And I want to return to that tension you sort of identify in your paper between the rhetoric of digital sovereignty and the reality. But first, I want to ask Ewelina how you think EU digital policies, and especially the AI Act, will impact this region, and if there are challenges or opportunities that you see, especially when it comes to protecting fundamental rights.
Well, of course, our hope and the whole objective of regulating digital policies in general is to create favorable conditions for the companies to thrive in the new technology world, and by creating legal certainty and by creating rules that have certain fundamental rights and digital principles. I hope that you're aware that we have a formal declaration on digital principles that was signed by 3 presidents of the 3 institutions. And that's an important sign that whatever happens in Europe, we want to keep fundamental rights and digital principles high on our agenda. And that's also what differentiates Europe from any other region in the world, actually, because for us, people come first and the fundamental rights come first. Now, of course, a lot will depend on the implementation, that's for sure, and on the interplay of all those rules and laws that are relatively new. So that's certainly the opportunity is, to create the legal certainty and favorable environment, to put some funding, to coordinate the funding, to coordinate the actions, help member states also go in the right direction, in the same direction. Again, respecting the rights. We have the so-called Digital Decade Compass, where we have identified 4 pillars in which we want to invest, and AI will also contribute to this. But the challenge, of course, will lie in how it will then play out in practice, which is why we have put in place for AI in particular, but not only for AI in general, strong governance structures of different types. So one of the things that Filip was lamenting in his paper was that there was lack of transparency and lack of participation inclusivity. These are 2 rules that are very high on our agenda, and you can trace them in all the digital acts that have been adopted under this mandate. And that's the challenge is, of course, not to have a fragmentation, which is why this is a regulation and not a directive, because a directive, of course, opens more up to differences. Now, it's a regulation, but it does have some level of flexibility for different reasons. As we said, not to freeze the innovation, but also to allow, changes with the development of the technology. And for this, we will have, as I have shown, the different structures that will be advising and that will be on it. So it will be a work in progress, a continuous work in progress. And that's probably also a challenge, but at the same time, an opportunity.
So my next question to Éva and to Filip as well is this enough? Is the AI Act enough to ameliorate some of the challenges that you both pointed out in your presentations?
Shall I start?
Yes.
No, it's not. I mean, if you want my short answer, the AI Act is far not enough. I mean, the AI Act itself creates some problems, such as the self-assessment to be considered as high risk or not. So the industry will have. We will require the industry to be very much self-controlled, and I believe that in some companies and in some with companies where the values we share as Europeans, there are some overlaps, there will be easy to have some sort of agreement. If you think about China and the Chinese AI development, I'm not sure that social scoring or biometric surveillance techniques or any other AI solutions that are not banned but could be considered as high risk, how this AI Act will mitigate those risks if these companies are not voluntarily categorizing themselves as high risk. Also, the Act itself, I mean, I don't think that, I mean, if we take the standpoint from an illiberal democracy, the AI Act has no role and it shouldn't have an objective to change illiberal democracies. It's an AI Act. This is a risk-based act instead of having a right-based act that the civil society have been very vocally criticizing the approach from day one. But this is what we have, and I'm not saying what we have is. I mean, we have innovation and we have a first law, and there is also room to change. If you think about the Data Protection Directive back in 1995, the ultimate goal of the Data Protection Directive was to ensure that personal data can freely flow between member states, and then later on, during the GDPR and beforehand, the EU institutions realized that the data is such an asset that we have to have this fundamental rights perspective. And I hope that it will happen the same to the AI regulation as well. That as a first step, we have this industry-based, innovation supportive way of regulation. But in the long run, we will realize that there is certain very important aspects where fundamental rights and rule of law and other core values are so important that we need at some point stricter rules. If you think about, the data sets these companies feed their algorithm, this is the most valuable asset. They are openly talking about their algorithms, but they're not talking about the data sets they're feeding their algorithm with. So I think coming from the data protection perspective, within a few years, we will have an improved version of the AI Act, or there will be delegated acts or sectorial acts where we will pay more attention, like in healthcare, biometrics, and other fields where fundamental rights will be more important. And as a last remark, and I really hope that it will be extended also for migrants and asylum seekers, and we will not have this two-tiered sort of society where some gets less rights than others.
Filip?
Thank you, Eva. I agree with everything you say. I'd like to bring another thing to another issue to the conversation. I mentioned the involvement of advocacy groups and civil society organizations in the AI Act process, and I would really like to use this time to applaud the efforts of the European Digital Rights Initiative and the efforts led by Sarah Chander and Daniel Leffer in particular, who really, I'm quite in awe of how much was made possible during the negotiations and the litigation. And there were, of course, several obstacles with the lack of transparency and the lack of institutionalization of societal stakeholders at every single level of the legislation, which I think would actually be beneficial for the EU. Right now, as from what I gather, it seems that both, I mean, not just the positive sides of the AI Act, but all the shortcomings, the potential or arguable shortcomings of the Act are being put directly on the shoulders of the European Commission, whereas looking from the inside, Commission was more technical, while the Council played, I would say, hawkish role in the process, with the Parliament trying to swing it to more human-centered AI. And it wouldn't be possible without the active participation of various, usually underfunded, but very professional CSOs around Europe. And I think that's, well, that's a lesson we should all learn with, because it's not just about empowering the society, it's actually about making the legislative process better, more professional, and avoiding all the political problems that arise, because very often the states weren't very clear or lacked transparency when it comes to communicating their position, their deliberations, discussions. They were very much influenced by certain interests within the AI sector. And in the end, it's going to be the citizens, the consumers, who are going to be angry at the EU, not their own governments. And I think the European Commission in particular could actually be, given this is a proper interpretation of the process, and I would like it to be, I would like to point out that there is one slight problem, or big problem, with involvement of stakeholders at the AI board, not the AI office, but the AI board. From the last version of AI Act that I read, it's still not the official one, but close, I learned that they're going to be selected by the member states. So imagine Hungary and Poland, Fidesz and Hungary, Fidesz and PIS government selecting their own not gerrymandered, by astroturfed CSOs to represent the voice of civil society. Well, there's nothing stopping the European Commission. Of course, I have no power over that, but from setting up an independent team of CSOs that would be just an advisory board or committee, a team of experts and activists who could officially consult certain policy agenda, so that the decisions can be taken with a better understanding of what the society wants. And I know European Commission has chosen this policy direction in many fields, and including the digital ones. But I think the European CSOs are mature enough and professional enough to actually be very helpful and very relevant and robust players when it comes to EU regulations. And the expert field is very narrow, and with most of lawyers and specialists, experts on AI ethics and regulation representing the industry. So we should cherish the civil society, at least we should cherish it. And when it comes to societies with problems struggling with liberalism, that also means those organizations should be somewhat supported in terms of know-how, resources, legal protection, funding for awareness campaigns. This is something that I deeply believe Europe can benefit from, because in the end, it's the CSOs that helped to defend the original version of the act presented by the Commission, and then even more the more democratized proposal voted in by the European Parliament. So this is something I would love to see. Hopefully it's gonna be at least a question of an issue for further discussions.
And so Ewelina or Éva, any quick reactions?
If I may answer, I mean, I will not answer to all the arguments, you know, like Éva was saying, for example, on the self-determination and external companies or actors coming into the EU. So first of all, the AI Act applies to anyone who will act in the EU. So the prohibitions will apply also to the external actors who want to be active on the EU market, and this is, you know, the prohibitions are absolute. It's not a self sort of decision. So if you are engaging in any of the practices that are considered prohibited, it's just an objective fact that that's prohibited. But let's say that it's a broader discussion. Answering to Filip's call, it is true that AI board will be composed by representatives chosen by the member states. Let's remember two things, however. One is that it's just an advisory, so they have advisory and assisting role. The real power, if you wish, in supervising, controlling the implementation will be performed by AI office. And the second thing is what you are asking for is already in place. It's the advisory forum, which is gathering also civil society. So yes, it is for startups and industry and stakeholders, but there is also space for civil society and academia there, and they will have a formal role and will be consulted. So they will be listened to in the process. Last but not least, maybe on the support, broader support to the civil society organizations, especially those that are standing on the you know, fighting for media freedom, for freedom of speech, for fundamental rights. There are all sorts of different support, including financial, for example, in the media program, which is also managed in Connect. So I happen to know something about this. We have financed a lot of you know, different initiatives and different organizations active in fact checking to fight disinformation and so on, which is, of course, all of this is interlinked. But let's remember also, and I want to be very, you know, clear about this. Very often we hear calls about, you know, EU should finance this, EU should finance that. Let's remember that EU budget is 1% of GDP. I mean EU product. So that's really not a lot for all the calls that we would have. So maybe this is something, you know, there will be a new MFF discussion. I don't see it going anywhere in the direction of, you know, boosting the budget. But let's remember, you know, that, for example, if you want to compare it to the US federal budget, they have something around 25%. That's 25 times more. So maybe that's also a reflection for a democratic, you know, and future EU. Do we want to have powerful EU that is helping really and financing to the level of expectations? I mean, the Next Generation EU fund and borrowing on the markets was one of the solutions that this Commission has tried. Not an easy one, a controversial one probably, but that was a way to sort of add to the pot that we have to distribute. But of course, you know, there is as much as it is, and there are all sorts of needs. But certainly, it's I mean, the democratic processes and civil society organization do have support, also financial, from the EU.
So in the last 15 minutes or so, I think we'll pull some questions from the chat, which I will pose to the group, and you can jump in. So the first one is about, in view of the shortcomings identified by Filip in his paper, is it better to start from scratch and write new AI policy, or to improve what we have today? Is it possible to write such complex cross-industrial and cross-ministerial AI policy?
Well, of course, it's hard, but since we had a quite drastic change of power in Poland, it's a perfect opportunity to start these talks. Maybe during the initial works, it's gonna turn out that the previous strategy is a good starting point, and it should be only revised. But there are also technological reasons for the revisal. For revisal of the strategy. For instance, no general purpose AI fundamental models were being discussed in the paper. It's I mean, the Polish one is more less focused just on the industry, but I'd assume that, for instance, AI in agriculture is going to be less affected by the generative AI revolution than, for instance, public administration. So maybe not all of it needs to be revised, but I think it's also should be related to the question of funding. And I made that point in the paper. A lot of institutions, not just the EU, struggles with the fact that there are different agencies distributing different types of grants and providing different sorts of privileges or just money to entrepreneurs or research institutes. Well, this is not a good thing, exactly as Ewelina said, compared to the gigantic budget spent on AI by China and the United States. So it's very hard to combat that when we have less money and we divide it into more streams. So perhaps we should think of a more participatory participatory agenda where those institutions would have a say, but the money would be pooled. And I mean, combined, so the political actors and officials would have a say, and the different interests would be pursued, but the overall amount of money and oversight would be more cohesive, which is something we desperately need. And this is also something that I think comes from the idea adapted by Mariana Mazzucato in her EU paper. So if we want to make the EU more mission-oriented, we should follow also these sorts of recommendations, and because that's precisely how the Silicon Valley emerged. It wasn't a private entrepreneurial initiative. It was a state-funded research facility that very intentionally gathered the top minds in one place, and that's why we're gathered here via Zoom or other usually US-based US innovations, and because it pays off. So yeah, I would also like to raise that point.
Ewelina, thoughts on improving today's AI policies or the difficulty in crafting complex legislation?
Yeah, well, I believe that the whole AI Act, but also AI national policies should and must be revised regularly. And the Commission had this role to check the national AI strategies, and I think they still have this role, if I'm correct. And why we need that? It's not only because technology develops so fast paced, but it's also depends on, when we learn from the problems, when there is a co-decision. So we have to align our national strategies and the EU strategy as well to the new developments, but not only, state level, but we can also talk about industry level and company level and government level and ministry levels. And this is where I have some problems seeing a country like Hungary, where the Chinese influence and buying Chinese developed AI is a reality. So can the Ministry of Finance use a China developed LLM application to be used to answer emails? How these inputs and prompts will be used and transferred maybe to China? So if you think about TikTok, when it turns out that access to data is available to the Chinese government as well during the hearing at in the US on TikTok, then there was a huge, I think that was a moment when everyone understood that not all the industry players are coming from the US or Europe. But there are other countries where there are different rules. And I was not talking about the banned version of AI technologies, but I was talking about the high-risk ones. And for the high-risk ones, it can be pretty problematic. And when the governments align with some other authoritarian regimes using AI techniques, collecting data, and then analyzing those data, then it can be a problem. And the Commission has a role in this, and also national governments, national civil society organizations, and all others to require proper transparency so that we can evaluate. So my understanding is in this that, of course, governments will evaluate and update their national policies. That's important. There are trustworthy governments and less trustworthy governments, unless it comes to national security, where none of them are really trustworthy. We have seen it with the Pegasus, where 14 EU countries bought the Pegasus software to survey their own citizens. And then comes in the role of the Commission. And I know it's very pricey, and I know that the proper financing of enforcement is crucial. But we have seen that even though having the best pieces of legislation, such as the GDPR, companies just don't meet those requirements and they try to hide. So what happened to Facebook? What happened to many other companies where we struggle to enforce national good level or EU level regulation? And this is why I think the proper oversight is so important. And this is why we need updated policy, both EU level, national level, but also institutional level across the EU.
So we have another question asking if you could give some examples of good AI strategies on the national level. I think this could be in the EU or internationally. Do we have any shining star examples to cite?
Well, as far as I remember, Spain had a very strong, what I had, and when I looked at the AI strategies, I had this civil society fundamental rights glasses on me. So I am not sure that I can answer this question unless you ask from the fundamental rights perspective. But in that case, Spain, for example, was strong. Germany had very important assets. And I think what is important here, and when I said that the values of governments are mirrored in the AI policy and strategy they create. So if you look at the Netherlands, if you look at Germany, for example, data protection is very strong culturally in these countries. So privacy and data protection has a very important role in their strategy, while in other countries where transparency is stronger, like in Sweden, for example, and in the Nordic countries, there you get that angle. And in some countries, none of these are available, such as in Hungary, where the whole fundamental rights angle was not even mentioned. So nobody really had a focus about that. So I cannot talk more in details about this because I'm not sure about the angle we would like to take here.
So referencing these two national level strategies that Filip talks about in his paper, there's a question about whether there are plans to update them. And I think this is a good way to segue into a more forward-looking question, which is how will the change in government in Poland possibly change AI policy, either in the short term or the longer term?
Yeah, so I already spoke about my opinion on the revisal of the Polish strategy. Well, in the end, the strategy is just a document. Of course, it's great if it's a living document, but I think it should be a process. On one hand, that involves different stakeholders, and we spoke a lot about CSOs and organizations representing the underprivileged groups or discriminated communities, but we should also remember that we should be discussing how to involve consumers at the very early stages, workers, trade unions, scientists. I mean, scientists that work in the academia, not just scientists that branch out to the industry. they have some sort of representation, perhaps less than large multinational companies on the national and the EU level, but still. So when I say stakeholders, I mean basically the end users of those technologies. And again, it's going to lead to some political repercussions if whether we want it or not. It's just a matter of who's going to pay the price if something goes wrong. And we can speculate whether it's going to be the European institutions or national governments. But you mentioned, one of the panelists mentioned that it's impossible to imagine a government in Poland or Hungary stepping down. I think it was you, Eva. But the Minister of Healthcare in Poland did step down, was forced to step down after an unlawful use of personal data digitized by the states related to medical issues. So it is possible. Even authoritarian governments are at some points afraid of the citizenry. So there's something positive to dwell on. But apart from the participatory side, we should all have these conversations as early as possible so we avoid the political turmoil as we are experiencing right now with the AI Act, both on the EU and member state level. But from my perspective, I would focus not just on fundamental rights, which are extremely crucial, but I'm also quite skeptical whether sectoral AI regulation can fully handle that. As I said before, it's not a silver bullet, and I don't think it can be. It has to be taken care of on the rule of law level and dependence on the judiciary matters and so on and so forth. But what does matter is the fact that the agencies who prepare and design those strategies should be responsible for executing them, which is not an obvious thing. It's one thing to strategize and create a wonderful document, but then you have the regulatory oversight. And this is something that we all have to learn from. There are no perfect examples, but this is also one of the questions that's going to decide upon the future that the technological and economic and political future we're going to be living in very short time once the AI adoption intensifies. So we need strong agencies and we need participation. The question of strategies, I think it's less important than who actually carries out those policies. And you can have wonderful strategy, but without proper means, legal means, funding, or political mandate, it's not gonna lead us to positive outcome.
So do Éva or Ewelina have 30-second reactions to that? Otherwise, we're almost at time. So
I had a reaction to the previous question. I didn't manage to to react to. I just wanted to, which was on the implementation and on the governance, and how do we make sure that that it works. It's precisely what Eva said, and I fully agree. It's very important to have laws, but it's even more important to implement them and to have mechanisms to monitor and to be able to adjust to the new developments, to how things are going. And the fact that there was a question in the chat, how do we make certain countries adopt AI Act? Well, the good news that it's a regulation. So it is automatically, the moment it enters into force, all the member states will be subject to the regulation. And of course, there is a established system of bringing member states also to justice if they do not respect EU laws. So, I mean, let's hope we will not get there. It's a long way. It's still 36 months to full application after the adoption. So we are still not there. But voila. So that the question is, the execution of the AI. And I think that we do have a good governance structure, also internationally, by the way, because we didn't have a chance to mention that. But EU, of course, is not stopping at the EU borders, but we want to be shaping the policies also outside. There was another question about the UK. Well, UK is outside of the EU. They also have their own policies, but there is quite a worldwide convergence on certain principles well, at least in the democratic world internationally. And that's also a very big step forward in a relatively short time.
Yeah, I think we will all be following closely over the next few months and years as the AI Act comes into force, and also seeing how it plays out on these national levels will be really interesting, and internationally as well. We'll see to what extent the Brussels effect takes hold on AI. So we're at time. It's 4:30, and I want to thank our three panelists for their great interventions, and also thank my colleague Susanna Vey from GMF for organizing this panel. Congratulations to Filip again on your paper, and thanks to everyone for joining and your great questions. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.